Welcome everybody to February's edition of Drink and Draw with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist for the museum. We got a great event for you tonight. We're going to be looking at soldiers' portraits with colored pencils. And of course, we have our resident artist, Yvette Pino, who's going to be leading you through the event tonight. But before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support in providing this free programming that we constantly get to put out there to our audience every month, not just with Drink and Draw, but also with our trivia nights and our virtual discussions, our movie nights, book talks that we have coming up. We're going to continue our virtual programming through the rest of the year. Even if we do go back to live events and we are able to open the museum sometime soon, these virtual programs are a fantastic way to reach everybody who can't really just come to Madison on a whim and enjoy some of the programming with us live and in person. So thank you again to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation and their executive director, Ms. Jennifer Carlson, for their continued support. We greatly appreciate it, and we greatly appreciate everybody coming out tonight, joining us with our programming. On that note, I am going to turn it over to Yvette so we can get down to the brass tacks of what we're here to do tonight, which is to work on our artistic skills. Yvette, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Great, thanks, Eric. And I do want, hey, Eric, will you highlight my video until I start sharing screen on my other one? So thanks again. That was Eric welcoming you all to tonight's Drink and Draw. My name is Yvette Pino. I'm the art curator here at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum and also the resident artist for these Drink and Draws. It's been a pretty popular program, so I'm happy to see all of you here. And I'd like to just welcome, I'm not going to put her on the spot, but we have a potential visiting artist for one of our future Drink and Draws. Army veteran Amber Hoy is here with us tonight. So howdy, Amber. Thank you for meeting us. Amber's a good friend of mine, so I'm excited to see her here. Tonight, like Eric said, we are going to be working on portraits. That was by request. We did have some folks say they wanted to, Amber said hi to everybody. That's a good note before I start. So throughout the program, if you have not joined us today, the way it works is I'm going to share my screen and use an iPad for drawing purposes tonight, and you can follow along. If you visit our website, there is a blog post that has a couple of tutorials, if you will, for basic tutorials on portrait drawing, plus it has the image that we're going to be working on tonight. So if you need to reference that, it's at our blog post, and Mike is putting it up in the chat right now. If you have questions throughout the night, please use our chat. Please use the chat forum in that. And Mike Olson, who's here with us this evening, is going to be keeping an eye out on the chat. And he'll feel free to interrupt me at any time to let me know that you guys have questions. So please utilize that. I will stop and answer questions if I'm going too fast or I'm speaking too fast, or you just have a question on what we're working on. Feel free to use the chat box and we will stop and talk to you that way. As we go through the night, I'll also give a few of you an opportunity to hold up your drawings, and we can share with the group if you want to. You don't have to. And tonight, like I said, we are focusing on portraits by request, and I'm going to be featuring a veteran, U.S. Army veteran, Madison resident, previously, before he died in 2012, Robert Wallace, who before he died was one of the last living Buffalo soldiers. And I'll get a little bit more into Robert's story as we go on. And for tonight, I'm using the medium of choice that I'm using is colored pencils. So this is Prismacolor colored pencils. This is the type of color pencil that I love to use. They can get somewhat expensive if you buy the whole set, but like this set, I think is like $12 at Target. You don't have to use Prismacolor if you just have whatever kind of Crayola colored pencils around the house or whatever brand of colored pencil you have. Feel free to use them. This is how I spent a lot of my learning years drawing, was drawing portraits with Prismacolor. The reason why I love Prismacolor colored pencil is because they are softer. I have a very heavy hand when I draw. So Scratchy colored pencils usually will set the hair on back of my neck up. So I prefer Prismacolor because they have a little waxier, buttery feel. And I also love the Prismacolor color blender. So this, I'll show you on the iPad how I would use it, but this is good to start when you're layering colors. I have a painting background, so this helps me blend colors. Like I have a very painterly hand. Not everybody is a fan of this. This does have a little scratchier feel. If you get a good one, it's really waxy and it works really well. But sometimes I'll run into a scratchy side and it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. Um, but that's some example of colored pencils on sketchbook paper. This is a drawing I did well in basic training of a battle buddy of mine. Nelson asked me to draw her portrait from a picture. So I never ended up giving it to her because either I forgot or we didn't like it. But for tonight, I will be drawing on my iPad using the color pencil um, rendering. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and um, unhighlight myself and share my other screen. So I'll start sharing from my iPad. All right. So if you guys work digitally, if anybody works digitally, let me get off this screen. Uh, I have a program called Procreate. And so in Procreate, I'm able to have a couple of tools. The way I'd work on my desk, if I was working on sketchbook papers, I'd have the reference image next to me and then my pencils and paper. Working on digitally, I fought for against it a long time, but I really, really like this platform because I don't have to have a table full of pencils around me. But you'll see as we get into the drawing that we are going to be. The program is
Yvette,
very yes.
um, I'm having a real hard time with my speakers. Can you put the name of that program in the chat, please?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Let me see here. It is called Procreate, and it's for an app for my iPad. I think you can use it on other platforms as well, but I put it out there in the chat for you. Okay, so here we are. We are looking at Mr. Wallace here. So like I mentioned earlier, Robert Wallace was a Madison resident, one of the last living Buffalo soldiers. And to the left that I just pulled up is the abstract from his oral history from the Veterans Museum. Part of the drink and draw for me has always been telling stories of people and objects within our collection. So Mike put the link to Robert's oral history transcript in the chat if you want to learn more about Robert's story. I'll tell a few stories as we go, but the drawings, I want to get into the drawings since that's what we're all here for. So this is Robert Wallace, and for those of you that want to just draw tonight and hang out and draw, I'll be having the image up in reference throughout the whole evening, so you can go ahead and view here on the screen. I know some of you might be working from iPhones or iPads and your monitors are smaller. That's why I wanted to let you know that that the blog post has the reference image on it. And I'm going to be giving instructional, but a lot of tonight will probably just be watching some of the way I draw and talk about the decisions that I'm making. I'm not going to try not to get too overly instructional for you, but for those of you that need it, I do want to share because that has been a request in the past. So when we draw portraits, a lot about learning how to draw the face or human anatomy in general is about learning your proportions and learning about how to set up your preliminary template to get you started. For me, I've been doing this for a while, so I don't usually set up my drawings like this very frequently, but for tonight, I went ahead and did that. So what we have here is, I brought this up in a previous drink and draw. When you look at the face from the just frontal view on our reference drawing, his head is tilted and sort of slanted, but this grid to the left is for looking full on frontal, and you see your circular head is divided into little quadrants. So if you divide it in half, that's where your eyes are gonna fall. And then if you look at that lower part and divide that in half again, that's where the bottom of your nose and your mouth. And I'm going to give you some more references to that. If I take this and overlay it onto his face, this is a way that if you're just starting out and you need to get your proportions lined up, you could go up against a window or like a computer monitor, or if you have access to a light box, you could put a piece of tracing paper and overlay it, or use your drawing paper and overlay it on top of a light box with your artwork, so you can start learning these proportions. And this, like I said, was a full looking directly at the person's face. So if we needed to tilt it a little bit, so that you see where that is lining up on the center of his nose and his eyes. When you start looking at an image, you know, if you need to start figuring out how to work the angle on the face, you can see that there's a circle here on his face, right? And then the human head itself is not a perfect circle. It actually has this sort of egg unit that goes on the back. And then on his head here, I did this globe to the left. If you want to find the center line, you're going to like look at the globe and make a curved line. And that's where I did on his nose here, and then a curved line across his face, because our face is not flat, right? But if you want to just lay out a square and start out in a square way and do it falling back in space, you can do that as well, and then find your circle on there. That seems a little confusing, I know, but it's really just about gridding out your portions. If you go to the website, I put this reference drawing here that'll help you. I'm going to zoom in here. It helps you really start to think about laying out where the parts of our face fall. And for the most part, this works right on the money when you're measuring where people's eyes fall and where their nose falls. So you can go through and start. You see, you have a circle, cut the circle in half into quadrants. And then if you take the lower, divide those in half on the bottom. So if you're looking right here, you divide those quadrants in half. It's all about breaking everything into half into another half. One thing I want to point out as we start is, and I will point it out as I start drawing, I noticed that lines on the inside of the eyes are really going to start lining you up for the edge of the nose. It's amazing how a lot of these quadrants will start to line up to help you make sure, for example, the inside of the eye here, it will go down and see how it falls on the outside of his nose. Those are going to be helpful reference points for you. I do this a lot. I'll do the angle now from the other outside of the eye to help me figure out where I need, if I'm drawing a nose too narrow or too wide, I'll go back and reference these sort of angles to make sure that I'm staying in the correct proportions. Sometimes you might want to exaggerate if you're doing exaggerated features. That's not what we're here doing tonight. I'm not working on a caricature. I am trying to do a portrait. And you can see the edge of his mouth lines up with the center of his eyeball, right? You can't see because his fingers are here, but that's in theory where that lines up. So that's what you're seeing if you look at this over here. And just want to make sure I'm not in, I'm going okay pace for everybody. But we can go back and reference this as we move on in the drawing. We'll take that section off, and then you can see here, I've sort of given myself a nice layout to help build how I want to start with my drawing. So if you want to start giving yourself a grid, I'd start with a regular pencil and draw really lightly. Don't, Mike, can you hear me?
Yep.
I just want to make sure, are we recording this?
Yes.
Okay, great. It just didn't say it on my end, so I wanted to make sure. So thank you, Mike. So if you want to start by giving yourself your preliminary guidelines. And that's all these are guidelines. Let me actually create a new layer so that it's full transparency. You start just, I don't actually have the image underneath when I'm starting. I usually will just start freehand, but I'm doing this for the sake of you being able to visually see what I'm talking about tonight. You can start seeing where those quadrants start breaking up. And let's take that one off. So another example of this, let me take the background image off. When I start out on my drawing, this is when I would use a template. If I want to keep in proportion, this is what I would look at. I got that box, and then I started creating some circles in there and tilted the head in the direction that I wanted it to go, and then laid out a lot of where the eyes are. A lot of portraits and getting good at portraits is learning the anatomy and learning to start from the inside out, drawing a lot of skulls and seeing where the bones fall. And then you start building in, and you building in with muscles, and you really start to understand where eyelids fall, where you put the eyelids, where you put the cheekbones. And let me give us a reference so that now you, for those of you that are drawing, can have the reference image. So to the left is Mr. Wallace, and to the right is my preliminary guides for me to start drawing. And you can see I've just added different options for myself. So these drawings that I do, the goal is for us to get to this, right? You saw it at the very beginning. The goal is to get to a place where ideally the image looks like what you're drawing. This takes years and years of practice. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I use the layers of colors to how we use the layers of colors to keep building this up. Okay, so let's start here with the eye. When I start the portrait, I always try to start with the eyes. And usually this is going to guide me on how far I end up going, if I end up getting all the way to the end of the drawing. Because if you can't capture the eyes, you're really probably not going to capture the essence of the person who you're drawing the portrait of. So it's really important that you focus some good amount of energy and time in getting the eyes as correct as possible. For me, I zoomed really in. This is, and it depends on your reference image too. Like this one, you don't get a lot of his eyeball on the left. So I had to make some artistic choices of where I felt maybe that I might fall. And the other thing to note, and I'll leave the guide up on this one. We'll go ahead and draw on the guide layer. So when you are starting, the eyes actually fall, this width of this eyeball is going to be the space in between eyeballs is usually not eyeballs, eyes is the length of an eye. So you want to put another eye over here. So in other words, this space should be equal to this space, equal to this space. All right. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more. And the way I draw is using a lot of color. At some point in my learning years, when somebody was instructing me, they reminded me that the face isn't just like monotonal. There's a ton of colors that fall in the pigment of our skin. So I always find a lot of greens and golds and pinks in our skin, and I use a lot of green and purples when I'm drawing skin. So that's just something, if you see me adding colors that you may not see, a lot of it is the way I look at things. I will really examine what colors are underneath to build up the tones to get to the color scheme that I want to see. So I'm going to take our grid off here, and we're going to start working on this layer here. So if I zoom in on his eye, then what I see here is a lot of purples. So if I go in the eyelid here, so one thing I want to point out, let's unlock that layer. One thing I want to point out is that if I'm drawing on paper, I use a lot of dark colors and layer. On the iPad, I have a little bit more liberty to use dark colors first because my lighter colors will still come. Like, for example, if I use a really dark purple and then I decide I want to use a white or like a lavender on top, you're going to still be able to see it. If you're drawing on paper, you're going to have to really be careful about um, your layering, because it can be really easy to mud up your colors. You don't have as much freedom to layer the way I'm going to be doing it. So I'm going to be teaching you the way I draw, even with colored pencils. But I just want folks to know that you do need to be a little bit careful with starting with darker colors when you're using regular color pencils on paper, because you won't have the ability to add whites so easily on top of that. And there was a question about, are the colors selected on Procreate? I select colors from a palette. So up here in my toolbox up here, I can, excuse me, right here, I can pick from a palette. So when I go to this screen here, if I'm looking for a purple color pencil, then I'll go there. Let's see. I didn't catch what you just said about using darker colors first. Okay, so Eva, if you are drawing on paper and you're using darker colors, you want to know that when you need to start adding lighter colors on top of that, as you start layering, you're not going to have as much freedom as I have on the computer to add lighter colors on top. So if we're starting on a piece of paper, I'm going to still be doing the same process, but but you'll want to go lighter. So I actually need to get back to the right pencil because I forgot I changed it for something else earlier. So we go to sketching. I like the Procreate pencil. So in this, I can choose my different types of pencils that I use. Like I said, have a heavy hand. So that means I usually would draw really dark like this. For the layering that we're going to do, we want to try to do real light marks because we're going to be building up colors. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if I have on his eyelid here, I want to start building up these colors, and you can use the side of your pencil as well. And when I can see, as his eyelid goes back, you can start getting a little bit lighter as you go outward.
Sorry to interrupt, Yvette. We just had a
Yeah.
follow-up question, asking if the color box was personal or is that something available online?
In the Procreate, the brushes. So in Procreate, you can set up your own palettes if you prefer. For tonight, I'm selecting as I go. This is the standard template that they provide you. You can look at it from a disc. This is classic. Um, you can do a disc and choose from there. These are just the different Procreate tools that come with it. However, if you want to get more into Procreate, you can choose palettes online and just go use what's in that palette. And there's a lot of Procreate tutorials online if you're interested. And I need to go back to classic. So as I start taking the eyelid out, I start changing up. I see a little bit of blue in here. And sometimes if I'm using a reference photo, this blue might be in there and it might be a flaw in the photograph, or it might be part of the printing process. It's not actually a blue part on his eyelid. But in order to get that rich layered look, I will find colors within here to really start building up my layers. And I love to use orange and purple and gold to really give me some dimension. Um, and I will be honest with you guys, I've been drawing this way for so long that this is just natural to me. I haven't necessarily taught this in a step-by-step process before. So sometimes when you do something over and over and you get so well, you get so good at it, it it's hard to describe what comes naturally. So if I go too fast or it may seem confusing, just let me know. Well, thank you, Roger. I appreciate it. Um, so you can see here on the top of this eyelid, I just see a little bit of orange, and then I'm going to add a little bit darker red in here. And if you're at home using colored pencils, when I would do this in one of my sketchbook, I literally would have a table full of colored pencils in front of me, or I would have like a Wolverine hand with 5 colored pencils in one hand, and then another 3 in my mouth, and then so I sort of obsessed with using multiple colors. Some people like to just keep it simple. And if that's you, keep it simple. Do what you see. We don't all see the same way. So I'm just going to go with how I see the world and how I see different colors. And when I start bringing in different colors here on the left here, you'll see this little periwinkle here is nice. Um, the curve of his eyelid, it leads me to something that I think about with how I learned how to draw, and it's sort of cheesy, so just bear with me here. But I know if we all love art, we've all watched Bob Ross at some point in our lives. But the reality is, when Bob would describe how to draw, how to paint things, and he would say, I just think there's a tree over here. Let's put a tree over here. I'm actually telling myself how the curve of your eyelid falls when I'm drawing this. Like this, I think would fall right back in here. So maybe we need to put a little bit darker back here because it's behind. It goes a little bit behind another part of the skin. So it doesn't make sense for it to be bright and sitting on top. And because our eyelid falls that way. I think about anatomy as I'm drawing. And the only way you can learn how to do that is by studying it, by looking. There's a lot of great drawing anatomy books. I have a Bob Foster, How to Draw Basic Anatomy book that I use all the time.
We have sorry to interrupt, Yvette. We have a request to zoom out on the reference photo, if you could, please.
I can do that. How's that? I will need to zoom back in just because I need to look in and see it. But I understand if for those that just want to draw, want to have reference. So I want to show you guys now that I've built up some colors, how I would use the blender, the colorless blender with the Prismacolor, because you might be wondering what the purpose of it is and why I would use it. And this early stage of your drawing, you can feel free to be a little bit loose with your lines. You can see, like I said, where I have a really heavy hand. I'm practicing to loosen it up a little bit so it's a little bit lighter. So if you had a colorless blender and you see where we've made all these lines, this little tool in Procreate will allow me to do a similar technique that the blender would do. So if you've built up a few colors with your Prismacolors, and you want to have a little bit more painterly feel or get some of these to blend together, you can see how it's sort of making it like paint on here. Believe it or not, with the Prismacolors, it actually does have will do a very similar painterly feel. Not maybe as smooth as I get away with on this iPad, and that's probably better. After doing this a few times on the iPad these last couple weeks, I've decided I probably was relying on the blender too frequently. And I've gotten a lot better at my drawing since I've used to draw with colored pencils all the time. So I probably wouldn't use it as much anymore. But this is an example of how um, you could take all these colors and start to make sense of the shape of this eyelid. And you can see on the right, on the interior of the eyelid, it starts getting a little, I'll zoom back out, but you can see it starts getting a little bit darker in here. So I'm gonna start focusing on getting some of that color here. And don't worry, I've actually given myself, um, I drew this ahead of time. So I drew it in phases. So I'll be able to go forward and work on other parts of the face because this hour flies by. And I want to make sure that you guys get as much as you have. Just looking really quick at chat. So we were talking at the beginning before we brought you guys all back in. You know, it's been quite the year. 2020 was quite the year, and last year, um, my drink and draw in February was in person, and we had an incredible Valentine's Day event. And it's hard to think that it was a year ago this week that I was sharing silhouette portraits with everybody for drink and draw. And we will be together again at some point. But I actually enjoy the virtual drink and draws because I get to meet people that aren't in Madison, and you guys can spend some time drawing with me that wouldn't normally be able to hang out with us for drink and draw. So I'm going to show you really quickly how I'm going to handle this eye because you don't see the eyeball. And I mean, of course, you could just fill it all in the black, just like it is here. But um, um, that was Michael. That was one of the last times I saw you. We'll see you again, and we'll put your flag back up so you can draw your flag and get you your pretzels and soda. Uh, we miss you. Um, soon we'll be able to see each other again soon. Um, I'm going to show you how to handle this because, like I said, you could fill. Let me do a new layer and show you what I mean. You could see that the area of this eye is all dark, right? We can't see anything. So I could just go in and do exactly what I see. But what happens when you do that, I'll zoom this out. I mean, yeah, it looks sort of like what we're seeing, or it looks like a giant void, like there's nothing there at all, right? Like this emptiness. And so sometimes, depending on your reference images, you're going to have to make some artistic choices. And this is where studying anatomy really comes in to the picture because number one, you can use his eye to the right and see roughly how big his eyeball is and where it falls in the socket. And then the other part is, so knowing that your eyeball actually does not sit on top of your eyelid. So you want to think about it, goes all, this is the shape of it, but the actual lid itself is going to cover a great portion of the actual eyeball itself. But if you want to make sure that you can draw your whole circle, and then you can always do your layers on top to take that other part of the circle out. So practicing eyeballs is a really crucial part of learning how to draw portraits. And I know that sounds, well, I don't know. I'm going to quit saying how things sound. To me, these are all the things that I thought of when people were telling me how to draw these. Is that there's a lot of parts of our face and our eyeballs that we don't realize. You know, there's an outer ring, and then there's like an inner part here, your pupil, but then there's also sort of these lines that go in, and you really can't see it in this reference drawing, so we're not going to do that. But there's really fun tutorials online that you can practice drawing eyeballs to get depth and to really see how light reflects on them and how you can start building up color to make it look more three-dimensional. But if you can really master drawing an eyeball and how it falls precisely in the glance, in the socket, and how the person is glancing toward the camera or the lens, you'll really be able to capture the spirit of the person's face. Um, and it's hit or miss, you know. Sometimes it's easier to do this than others, but we're gonna just kind of go with a little bit of flying off the cuff here. So I'm gonna fill in. I like to. This is one of those parts where on the iPad I'm going a little bit darker. I probably should be going a little bit slower and layering up colors for you, for those of you that are drawing from home. So, like for example, I'm going to use some lighter colors to start with. So, and his eye obviously is not purple, right? Like he does, as far as I know, Mr. Wallace did not have purple eyes. But to go with the colors that I'm going in, I'm going to work my way up with um, these purples and golds and build up a brown eye color. And this looks really sloppy right now, but I'm also just trying to build up some. And I usually will add the white highlight later, just so that I'm not fixating and trying to get that. But to add some depth, I'll go with a nice soft touch of a lighter color on top there. And then I'm going to start building up the eyelid around it. And then we're going to fast forward a little bit to the work in progress a little bit further on down. But you can see there's a shadow that comes. Follow the shape of the eyelid when you're building all these different areas here. So I'm using the side of my pencil just to give me some shading. So I'm not, when I say the side, you can see how it's more like a crayon feel as opposed to just doing all these lines. And you can use, there's other parts of the drawing where we'll use techniques like cross hatching to build up. So for those of you guys that didn't know, Buffalo Soldiers were a cavalry division. They were tanks. They started out on horses, and you know, Eric might chime in a little bit. He drove tanks. I don't even know if drove is the right phrase to use, Eric. But the Buffalo Soldiers were the all black unit. I put do not disturb on it. Shouldn't have come up. All black regiment of tanks that were in World War II. And Mr. Wallace served in Italy and during World War II and in Korea. And his oral history is really fascinating because he talks about having to train with horses and take care of horses. And then after Pearl Harbor, having to really be reconfigure and learn how to train on tanks and be sent out, and explains a lot of what he did in Italy and things he was subjected to and some of his experiences. So I highly recommend going and reading his oral history. And you can see here, you don't see a lot of the results of what's to come, but you can see how I'm really starting to build up layers on this eye and building up some softer colors here. And then I'll start bringing in some skin tones. Build up. And again, I'm looking at the reference image, but I'm also seeing how colors play with each other. You know, do we have bright orange in our skin? Yes, we do, but it's not as obvious unless you're sitting and observing and really take some time someday and just look at your skin. And you'll be surprised how many greens are in your skin, how many oranges, different shades of pink. And if you want to learn, you know, teach yourself about um, mixing colors to create certain tones, practice on skin. It's really um, pretty amazing how you can do how much you can learn about different color schemes just by looking at your skin. All right. So that is the beginning of how you go with an eye. So let's go ahead and fast forward now, because I want to show you. So this is in progress of sitting. I basically sit in front of the TV and we'll just draw. And this is, you can see an example of where I've used the blender, the colorless blender, to start, you know, mixing some of these colors together. You can just keep it as like cross hatching if you like. But you've seen now that I've built up both eyes on here. And if I zoom into the right, now, does he have green eyebrows? He doesn't. But I started using a color that I'm going to be able to build up to create these browns, these rich browns and blacks into the hair follicles on his eyebrows. And then the other thing I should point out is you see here where these beautiful lavenders are. I've really started to blend. This has much more of a painterly blender feel on the computer. So in your paper, you're going to see a lot more sketching feel. Let me see. I started sketching, doing a lot more sketching toward the end here. So you can see on the top of his forehead here where I use a ton of colors. So you see all of this purples and oranges and pinks, and they're all crosshatched together. And as you start building up, you really start to see the skin pop out and develop. And we don't have to fast forward that far. We'll go back to working on his eye. So the inner part of the eye here is really dark. So I built up with a lot of lavenders, but then in order to highlight the top of his eyelid, you have to bring out some softer, lighter colors. So to give you actual, forgive me, I'm going to go actually be on the layer that I'm drawing on. The illusion of depth. So you have the really dark background here. I'm going to start adding a little bit, real soft touch to create this highlight in here. You can see where, and I'm looking right at this part here. I'm going to zoom back out, but really start to highlight this here. And honestly, when you start getting to this point in your drawing, this is where it's a lot of fun because you really start to see the person's face take place, you know, come together. And it's really nerve-wracking too, because you get so far and you don't want to screw it up. I just did a drawing of my father this week, and I was at this point with the drawing of my father's eyes, and it really threw me because I was staring into his eyes, and it threw me even more because what I realized the more I was drawing details that I was also staring into my brother's eyes. So to see my brother's eyes through my father's eyes while I was drawing it was really trippy, for lack of a better word, but sort of cool at the same time. To see your sibling in your parents' eyes was quite a gift. So sometimes on drawings like this, an hour is just not enough. These drawings usually back in my 20s would take me, I would just do it all in one sitting and stay up all night until I finished it. Now they take me about 3 or 4 days to complete, depending on how much time I dedicate to them. But you get to a point here where you're just, at this point, you're just building up layers. And for I can zoom in now because I'm really used to this. And when you're on paper, obviously you can't zoom in. I mean, you could use a magnifying glass if you wanted to, but um, it's good to step back from your drawing. Um, what I've discovered since I haven't been doing portraits for a while and I just came back to them, I and this zooming in, I've been almost shrinking the eyes too small. So I've had to go back and actually make them a little bit bigger because I've got so wrapped up into the tight, intricate details um and the zoom in that you have to take a time, step back, look, make sure you're still staying within your proportions and keeping everything on track to move to keep moving forward. Otherwise you'll get wrapped up in one area and the whole rest of it is out of proportion. So that's take some time, step back, take a deep breath. So we're gonna start working on a little bit of the shading underneath here. Hey Mike, how we doing on time?
It's 7:47 according to my phone.
Okay, great. So I'm going to keep drawing, but I want to talk about a couple points here for you guys. You just keep drawing along with me. I mentioned earlier that Amber might join us. She's thinking about maybe teaching a Sumi ink class, which I'm very excited about. And um, no pressure, Amber, but we'll talk more about that together later. But I really have been excited about the potential of inviting more guest artists. Last year we had Hannah who joined us and she's amazing and we will probably have her back. I'm looking for artists who can, provide some lessons in strategy, but we focus on part of our collection here at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. When we do this in person, you sit in the galleries and have a moment to look at the objects on exhibit and other still lifes that we pull out for you to draw from. And it's a way for people to look at objects in the collection and sit and examine and investigate them in a way that they maybe wouldn't do if they were just walking through a museum. When you take the time to stop, drawing's about observation. It's about looking at things and being with them and really, if you're drawing, you're literally moving your hand across an object to see how it moves, how it flows. And it's been incredible to see how people respond to objects that they're looking at that they never maybe would have stopped and looked at otherwise. And to even think about what they're drawing. I spent a lot of time in art school right out of the Army looking at students and in their defense, they were very young, but who would draw and appropriate military subject matter just from Googling a picture on the internet, but had no connection to what they were drawing whatsoever. They just saw an image and thought it was cool. And it was really eye-opening for me to see that how we can look at things and just absorb them and not really ask questions about what we're absorbing, what we're looking at, what we're recreating. And so I kind of made it my quest at that point to not object to people doing it, but to help people learn to stop and take a minute to ask themselves, what am I drawing? What am I looking at? Who is this person I'm drawing? What is their story? What is the story behind this military composition that just looks cool to me? There's a human element to that that shouldn't be overlooked for the sake of, you know, graphic content that looks cool. So this virtually is a really pretty amazing because we can also pull out images. Like this particular image, I do need to note is by a photographer, MP King, who was taken for the Wisconsin State Journal on an article about Mr. Wallace when he died in 2012. So this image is not from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. It actually is credited to the Wisconsin State Journal. And I point that out because a lot of times folks don't know, why would I bother to donate anything to the museum? Well, you know, it helps to put a face to a name, to a story. And we were privileged to have Robert give us his oral history. I have to look at the transcript to see when he actually provided the oral history. But um, you know, now I feel like drawing his portrait, reading his transcript, I know a little bit more about him, who he was as a person. His son was a firefighter and spent, I think, 20 years in the Madison Fire Department. I'd love to talk more to his family. So if anybody knows the Wallace family and can put me in contact with them, please do, because I'd love to, you know more about um, who he was and you know, his time in Madison. He retired from the military, so there's an incredible um, you know, extension of story that one oral history couldn't just capture. All right, so you can see how I've built up layers and how I started pulling colors from the palette and putting them together. Um, we'll fast forward here. I'll go to this one. So I'm moving forward here. If you just looked at this, it's kind of shocking with the reds and the pinks and the magentas, but those colors, when you start building up layers, really create this beautiful dimensionality to a drawing that if you sure you could get the same look if you just built up browns and tans and maybe a little bit of oranges, but when you start adding these different tones, it just gives this glow to a face that I love the way magentas make. I have darker skin, so I just love the way magentas make portraits of people that look like me glow. But you know, I think every skin tone has these greens and underlying accent colors that you can find that really help pop it off of your paper. And the reason I want to pull this image up as well is you can see as I start developing the face, I'm now building in, realizing what my whole composition is. Now, some people like to build their whole composition at the very beginning. I would actually promote that you do that. I'm very, very poorly disciplined when it comes to that. I am terrible about laying out my composition so that you can see here. I run out of space on the paper, and I'm going to share a little secret with you. I did that because I didn't lay out my composition right. Like we have his whole body here. Um, I ended up cheating a little bit and resized it midway because I have a computer and I can do that. When I'm drawing on paper, usually you'll see a lot of my drawings in my early years had cut off hands just because I ran out of paper. Um, so Hannah was really good at teaching people how to make sure you have the right proportions set up at the very beginning and how to stick to them. I admittingly am not disciplined when it comes to that, so I go a little rogue. But that's why I wanted to show you this part of the drawing, in that his hand, you know, we're starting to develop the rest of the composition. And in theory, you know, this, you don't have to have the full body on this. Um, I personally like a little bit of his uniform included in this. Now, something to note as far as composition goes. It's your drawing, you do whatever you want with it. That's the subjectivity of art is what is so beautiful about art. But if you're trying to stick with doing things the right way, when you are laying out your composition, you know, it's best not to cut somebody off right here at the top of their head. Make sure that they get everything in. Or for example, In a portrait like this, where somebody's hand is in the picture, you're not going to want your the reason why I had to cheat and bring the image, reduce it down, is because you don't want to just have these two random fingers, hanging out on his cheek. It doesn't make any sense. It's out of context. It doesn't. There's some ways you can graphically make things look cool. I just talked about doing that earlier, but um, if you're learning, if you're still in the learning phase, don't do it. Do it right, and then you can get creative. So I just wanted to point out, that this is where you start building in, you start looking at your composition as a whole. And as I got down to the end of this eye here, I noticed that I needed to start thinking about where that finger was and what kinds of shadows are in there. And if I stay zoomed in like this, I might end up with a really weird sized finger and hand in general. Trying to zoom back out here. Okay, let's see where we're at. We're at 7. We've got a few minutes left. I know this hour has gone by, and I knew this was going to happen with portraits, specifically colored pencil portraits. I challenged myself for this for this particular class because I wanted to get back into colored pencil drawing. But know that these do take some time to build up on the layers, and it is a little bit of a different outcome when you're talking about pencil on paper versus using a computer. But honestly, this program is not far off from the way I draw on paper. Thank you, Roger. I wanted to pull this this image up right here with the uniform. Let's see if I brought the different layer. No, I didn't. I brought this up because this green has this beautiful olive drab green. If we look at the reference image, you'd see that orange there. Now, this is the hand colored part of the photograph. There's not really that orange in there, but it's the way the light falls on the object. And that's how you start developing and creating some depth. So when I'm building up the jacket, you can see where I started here. I started looking at where light fell and created these oranges. And I think I need to be on that layer. So I would just add some oranges and then find those pinks again. And pink and green, I mean, red and green are complementary colors. So they really help bring out a lot of that dimensionality when you use them together. So this green jacket started out with a ton of colors. It did not start out green at all. And I just built in and drew and just continued to work in more and more colors until I got, you can start, this is an example of where you can start to see when we start layering colors, it starts to create, it's really fun to play with the layers because you really start to see things build up and come together. And you'll surprise yourself. It takes practice though, because as you're learning how to do this, it'll get really muddy really quickly. But that's how you get better at it. So I'll make it a little bit lighter over here. And for those of you that are a little bit more experienced artists and you join us and you put up with all of my instructions, I thank you. I hope you enjoy your time here with us. We do want to make more options available. For those of you guys that are still with us, if you have requests for something you'd like to learn, we do provide reference images for our guest artists. And for, obviously when I teach, I use directly from our collection. Hannah taught a cartooning class. Portraits was requested last time. I did do dazzle camo, so that was some fun abstract geometric. Amber's considering some ink. For those of you that don't know what Sumi ink is, it's like India ink. you know, I want to do some uniforms, like headgear, like helmets, uh, uniforms in general. We'll look at the aviation uniforms. We're focusing a lot on some of aviation history this year at the museum. So I will be looking at featuring some of our women pilots from the WASPs and uh, I'm blanking right now. Mike, help me out. Who's the Mitchell, Billy Mitchell? We're going to be featuring some stories on Billy Mitchell. Eric, actually, we have a few minutes here. Do you want to chime in on like some of the programs that are coming up and some of the things we're talking about at the museum?
Absolutely. We, along with our drink and draw programs, like I mentioned at the beginning, we do nights, virtual movie nights, where we discuss the filmmaking process. Those are a lot of fun. Our audience keeps getting larger and larger with each program. We don't actually watch the movies. We provide the movie. We don't provide the movie, but we, let everybody know what movie we're going to watch ahead of time. You have about a month to catch up with that. We do provide thought-provoking questions that we go over. And if you're just a film buff, those events are a lot of fun. We have serious in-depth discussions on, character traits, the movie making process, what directors are looking at, and then just the overall concepts and philosophical continuities of the movies themselves. We also offer bi-weekly discussions that cover various topics of military history, mostly pertaining to Wisconsin. We also have our famous trivia night. Those are getting fantastically popular. I think we had over 40 guests for our last one. Very competitive, but they're a lot of fun as well. And our next trivia night will be this coming Tuesday. You don't have to be a military historian. You don't have to be some great academic brain to have fun with those trivia nights. People just show up and they have a really good time. We have a lot of fun questions. Some of them are easy, some of them are extremely difficult, but still really enjoys themselves. And then we also are starting to institute book talks as well, where we bring in authors and they talk about their newest releases. And then, of course, if you are a foundation member, and Mike, maybe you can put some foundation information up real quick, that'd be great. We do offer a quarterly program called Mess Night, where we bring in a guest speaker who is intimately familiar with the topic that they're talking about, whether it's some sort of personal military activity, or they are just historically I'm losing my words here. Yvette, you mentioned losing your words earlier, and now it's carried through to me. But we do offer those mess night programs quarterly. And you can find out all this information. Mike has put the link up on our museum webpage under our events section. We would really like to be able to offer these programs in person like we used to. Unfortunately, that's not the way it's going right now. But like Yvette said earlier in the program, we will be returning to that hopefully soon. We're just not sure how soon. And then, of course, if you're interested in Wisconsin and Madison history, that is not the large, broad level history, but looks more in depth, you can certainly look at our cemetery tours. Our cemetery tour this year was done virtually, and it's available on our website as well. It's free of charge. And we just got a few emails today complimenting us on how well we did with our cemetery tours. We really appreciate those kind words. But it also lets us know that we are, really succeeding in what we're trying to do in this virtual world that everybody's trying to tune themselves in right now. We look forward to anybody coming out and join us for our programs. Like I said at the beginning of the event tonight, that these programs are free of charge. All you have to do is register on our website, and you're in like Flynn.
Yay, thank you, Eric. I'm glad you mentioned when you were talking about Mike. Mike is also our assistant gift store manager, and we've been talking about drink and draw kits, and one of the things we've talked about, if Amber does join us, is like how can we provide possible drink and draw kits that people could purchase ahead of time and have at home. We have a standard drink and draw kit that we had in the gift shop previously that we had an option. Well, we had an art exhibit up last year. We've since deinstalled the art exhibit, so we have a few more of those kits left, and they're all watercolor kits. And Mike can give you the gift shop link. I think we're working on the final language on how to put that online. But we are building a new field drawing kit option for people, so they'll be able to buy drawing kits. We're not going to call them drink and draw kits because we want kids to, look at them and think about drawing in the field, just like I did, like I mentioned, drawing at basic training and while I was deployed. But you have an opportunity to buy some basic supplies and bring them to drink and draw and use them while you're celebrating this program. So let me, before we bid adieu for tonight, I will take off all my layers except for the final drawing. So let's see here.
Hey, Yvette, I just want to chime in real quick
Yeah.
and say one more thing. You mentioned Bob Ross earlier.
Yeah.
Funny enough, a couple trivia nights, a couple months ago on trivia night, we did have a question about Bob Ross. He was an Air Force veteran,
Yep.
20 years. And he actually, just like you said, drawing in basic training, he learned his artistic chops at his duty stations, particularly his being assigned in Alaska. That's where he learned to draw his mountains and his trees.
Yep.
And he was actually the sort of drill sergeant screaming at everybody type.
Yep.
And once he got out of the air, he was bound and determined to never raise his voice again. And that's why he has that very calm demeanor now, or did rather.
Yeah.
Just a nice little interesting fact there.
Another interesting fact is he hated his hair. They permed it right before he had his, I think, what do you call it, first show. And he filmed it for the first show and everybody loved it and he became his brand and he hated it, but he could never cut it off because that was his brand. So
That's his trademark.
That's his trademark. But yeah, thank you for reminding me. I did forget that Bob Ross was a veteran as well. But so that reminds me of another option that we're looking at is pieces of war. So finding the beauty in war. I have pictures of flowers on sandbags and a lot of different images from our photography collection that I'm going to be referencing. So feel free to email me if you all have requests. I will utilize them. And we hope that perhaps we will have a guest artist in the next coming months. I have another female veteran friend of mine who is an artist that we are trying to twist her arm to join us a little bit as well. This, of course, is the final drawing that I created of Mr. Wallace, and I'm excited that portraits were requested because it got me back to doing the medium and that I love so much. A lot of people don't realize, but I spent many years doing colored pencil portraits, and that's all I did, and I miss it. So it's a very soothing process for me. So I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I'm sure thank you, Eric. I'm sure I have forgotten something somewhere down the road, but please don't hesitate to email me. Mike put my email in the chat box. I am always happy to answer questions. And I do apologize because I realized just now, I usually will go back to the audience and look and see if anybody wants to share their drawings. So on that note, before we leave, if there's anybody that wants to hold up their drawing, we can see where they were at. Let's see. Anne, let's see if I can. So, wow. See, you went with was that just a regular pencil? Yep. Just like a 2B or, okay. Wonderful. That's gorgeous. Thank you, Anne. I see Bill. We're going to replace pin. Hold that up one more time, Bill. And move it over to the left. There you go. I love the gestural hand that you use there. When I say gestural, a lot of that fluid mark making, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Jane, did you have yours up?
Who was it, Jane?
Yep.
Let's see. I'm scrolling through here.
I got her on pin.
Oh, you got a pinned? I don't see it. Hang on. Replace pin. There we go. Again, that's gorgeous. The nice tone. That had a lot of nice tone on it, Jane. I appreciate that. Thank you. Anybody else? We got going once. Oh, we got Amber. Hold on. Got one on the left with some color. I love just the little hint of color on the cheekbone. And you're starting to work it in on the forehead there. So that actually would be interesting to do start with a nice graphite tone and then add some hints of color around the facial features.
Yeah, I did too, because I was like, I felt like all the features weren't fitting into the face that I made.
Yeah, and and it's kind of hard too. I will say this much. It's one thing I learned about this process is I get very ambitious on drink and draw nights, and we used to do 3 or 4 images in one sitting, and I realized let's just feature one and let's just work through the night and try to get one drawing down. And you all have to forgive me. You are so patient with me. I'm an impressionist painter, so I'm all over the place. I'm the person in the studio where it's like, how did I get paint on the back of my shoulder? I don't know, but it comes together somehow. So I appreciate you all being here with me tonight.
We got one more who wants to show off their work. Alexis?
Alexis, where are we at? There we go. See, you got really that hand starting to build up where you can start building that shadow underneath and working in the hairline. Very nice. Yeah, because you did what I was saying is like you have to start at the beginning and get your composition so it fits on the page. I'm terrible at that. That's why I always love when Hannah's with us, because if you guys have ever been here with us when Hannah teaches, her demeanor is so calm. She's like the opposite of me. She's just so tranquil and calm and gives herself time to just draw and not talk. And but I love it because she's just like, that's cool. Yeah, here, do this. And all of a sudden your mind's blown with this amazing technique that she just shared with you. So thank you all again for being here tonight. My email's in the chat, yvette.pino@dva.wisconsin.gov. I hope you join us again in March. We're going to be back again. I think it's actually the same date, March 12th. I think it's one of those weird, it falls on the same exact date.
It does.
So second Friday of the month. It sneaks up on you. Last month I was like, oh no, it's this week, not next week. And I'll be announcing what we're doing in March pretty soon. It is Women's History Month, and I'm giving a presentation on women's uniforms at the end of the month. So I'm thinking we're probably going to be featuring the story of the WASPs and Jeanette Kappas, who's in our collection, and the blue Santiago blue Air Force uniform that was created for the WASPs. And I'm hoping that we can have some fun stuff to share with you. Stay safe, everybody. Wear your mask, wash your hands, be kind to one another, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in a month. So have a wonderful evening.